Howdy, folks. Happy Tuesday. We are here. We have some things to discuss. We will have Ted Starkey joining us from Newsday, correct, Russ?
Yeah, from Newsday.
Yeah, he'll join us at 1 o'clock to we'll discuss the Washington Capitals and their playoff fortunes and a few other things New York related. But we'll start the show with Russ, who's decked out in his Happy Tuesday. We are here. Somebody's got the show playing in the background here. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did for a second, then I faded.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we did.
All right. Well, anyway, Russ is decked out in his Mets regalia. He'll start us with the pre-show.
I mean, the Mets are playing. Is it the Mets? I mean, it is. It's interesting because watching a little bit more action yesterday, my takeaway is if we ever wanted to sort of pick on baseball players for not being in great shape, boy, there's a lot of beer guts in baseball right now. There really are. I mean, and they're not gonna lose them before the season starts. Besides Pete Alonso, I saw Cole Calhoun was scored one, and he's they're both young guys. So this is going to be an interesting season. Like this.
So Cole has that soft. Cole always has that softball like physique.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted.
And Alonso certainly does too. We have Ted Starkey on now from Newsday. There we go.
That's why Polar Bear works for Alonso as a nickname.
It does.
Well, I was going to say we have we're going to have a lot of Greg Luzinski's playing this year because he had at times he had a gut when he was playing.
Yeah, I'm Ted. I was noting how a lot of these baseball players sort of have beer guts this year, like more than usual. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think sitting 4 months in the house has that effect on a lot of people, including pro athletes. But it'll be interesting to see. With it's gonna be such a strange season as it is, but yeah, you can definitely tell that they weren't able to work out. There's creatures of habit. You can't go to the gyms to work out at home. So what else are you gonna do?
So I do have to pick on the Mets here because I saw that they have a promotion where you can go see a movie for free at Citi Field if you have a Citibank credit card, which means it's not free because you're somehow paying money to Citibank, but then you're probably going to have to pay $25 to $30 to park. So how is this movie actually free?
The way they work, that. I think you know that for a long time.
And the movies were like The Wizard of Oz. It wasn't anything recent. So I'm basically paying $30 to be at Citi Field to watch a movie on a giant screen in a parking lot. Like,
I don't get the appeal. I mean, I get the drive-in thing, but I mean, when you're picking movies that are 10 to 15 years old, I've seen stuff on HBO or cable forever. I get going out and watching. It's a little different, but
Well, when I had my ticket plan a couple of years ago, they showed a movie on the big screen. Parking did not cost me anything, and with it came popcorn and soda. So it may be something they do something similar. And granted, it didn't have a lot of people there, so you're able to easily spread out in one of the sections. So hopefully they'll social distance as opposed to what we've seen in the NFL. Where
I think this is more car-based. I don't think they're even getting near the stadium, Jan.
Probably not.
I will say this: I have never done a drive-through movie in my life.
Really?
Never did a drive-through movie. I mean, granted, I grew up in South Philadelphia. I mean, I could have gone to South Jersey, probably a couple places there or outside the city. Just didn't, and never got around to it.
Vineland, New Jersey, has a drive-in.
As somebody who worked in a movie theater for
recent movies.
As somebody who worked in a movie theater for 10 years, I think I've been to one drive-in movie, and it was such a terrible experience because this was before you could pick up the sound of the movie on your radio. This was when you had the thing that hooked onto your driver's side door or on the passenger side door, and it was this one speaker, and it was like a speaker that was broken, so it was like that. It was that kind of sound. So it's not exactly great to see like Towering Inferno with the sound mono with it. I don't even remember if it was Towering Inferno, but it was that type of movie. You don't do a drive-in to see Steel Magnolias.
Ted, do you remember any of the other movies? I'm trying to find it. Other than The Wizard of Oz, does one hit you? They were all older movies, but I just can't find it now.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember because they're all just, it's almost like public domain movies. It's ones they don't they don't pay a lot for them, or they pay nothing for them.
These are movies that are free on YouTube.
Exactly.
Basically,
you're just hoping for the novelty. You're into the novelty of a drive-through. They don't,
right?
And you can give two craps what the
They have one out by us. I think they're charging $40 per car, which is kind of ridiculous for someone to put them out on the island. So it's like,
I mean, I know there's a COVID surcharge, but come on.
$40 a movie I can watch for free and have all the snacks myself.
I think I think Russ knows Adventureland. I think they were charging $100 for one of those. I'm just like, really? Come on.
Just let me take a brief tangent here, because one of my favorite movies when I was growing up, like when I was 9 years old, was the war movie Midway. And, when we've talked about it before, this was a movie that, as a promotional gimmick back in the 70s, it was in Sense Around, like Earthquake. Yeah. And I think there was one other movie, and all Sense Around was, and I found out because I worked at
I saw Earthquake and Sense Around.
Yeah, I worked at the theater that I saw Midway at like 10 years later, and Sense Around was basically they plugged in extra speakers at the back of the theater. That was it.
They also had the thing on your feet for Earthquake, and that sort of brushed up against your feet to make you feel like. So I don't know what they called that, but that was part of it too.
Yeah, that I don't know, but they remade Midway, not the same movie, not the same plot, but it was about the same battle. They just did it with special effects. It was the guy who did Independence Day and The Patriot, and it wasn't a bad movie. But honestly, I wish they would stop remaking classic movies, because they never are as good as the original. It just, like True Grit. It was John Wayne, and now they remake it, and it's Jeff Bridges, and I wish Hollywood would stop it.
Yeah, that was a good. No, that was actually a good. If you're talking about which one, I think when he's played Rooster Cogburn.
No, I think it was the Coen brothers that remade True Grit,
and it was great. I love that movie. I thought it was great. I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
you got to do it right. You got to get the right people, and I think it's one of the better examples of if you're going to redo it. I enjoyed it. That's just me. I thought it was really well done.
Okay, I fell flat then. All right, we'll start the show, and I'll introduce you, Ted. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, 2020.
I'm Jan Levine.
I'm Anthony Mingione.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com, and we are pleased to be joined by Ted Starkey of Newsday, who will talk about a number of things in the NHL, and the Washington Capitals. We'll preview them. We're getting down to only a few teams that we have to preview before the start of the playoffs, which is good, because we shouldn't be previewing teams in the playoffs. We should be previewing them before the playoff. So anyway, let's start with some new. We're waiting for the announcement of the Hart Trophy candidates. I'm assuming it's going to come out in the next few minutes. Usually it's released by noon, but they haven't done it yet. But we'll update that when we get it. It was announced yesterday Brendan Lemieux was suspended for 2 games for an incident against Jonas Jonskoy of the Colorado Avalanche. I was talking with Russ about this, Ted, and I said, this was an incident during the season, and if he'd been suspended, it probably would have been for 2 or 3 games, but it would have been 2 or 3 regular season games. And in this instance, now it's 2 playoff games, so it takes so much more, there's so much more focus on it because it's 2 really important games.
Right. I mean, traditionally, if something happens in the playoffs, it's a 3-4 game suspension. It's down to 1 to 2 games, and I was a little surprised it was 2, because obviously, it's a best of 5 too. It's not a best of 7. So anything you kind of edge you can get. If you lose control of the series, it can go real fast in a best of 5.
I mean, he's got a history, so I think that played into it. Look, I think at the end of the day, dumb is dumb. And if the Rangers lose this series, David Quinn is not going to look at Brendan Lemieux with the same, nice eyes that he did when he first acquired him. This is what happens with Brendan Lemieux on teams. This is how he derails his career. He's got talent, he's got ability, but he doesn't know how to harness it. Even Claude knew how to harness it. If he can't harness it, he's not going to have much of a career with the Rangers.
Well, I mean, so it's a couple of things. So first of all, he didn't have a good year overall, right? Irrespective of this incident, he hasn't had a particularly good year generically, which is why he rode the pine a little bit and his minutes were cut down. The only advantage is the likely expectation of his salary rise is going to be incremental at best, which means that they'll probably bring him back for another year. We wrote it then. We thought at the time it was definitely suspension worthy. I mean, granted, it took 4 months for the suspension to be handed down, but we all kind of knew that he was going to get at least a game, maybe 2. The fun part's going to be is if they are playing well, regardless of the fact he was suspended 2 games, he's likely not getting in for game 3 if perchance they're up 2-0.
Right.
And the fun part was, though, he gets to play in the exhibition game against the Islanders, which should be kind of an odd dichotomy that, yes, you're suspended, but we're going to let you play in a game against the team that's going to be in the playoffs to potentially wreak havoc, and then teach you for 2 games when the playoffs start.
Yeah, and it's not like he's going to go after anybody on the Islanders.
Not at all. Never.
Speaking of the Islanders, Ted, we were talking about this yesterday. The information came down, I think, a couple weeks ago regarding the Nassau Coliseum basically being padlocked. And, we've heard some speculation about the Islanders maybe looking for, potentially to play someplace else next year, depending on whether there are fans in the stands or not. Whether it's at Barclays, or there's been some speculation about them asking the Rangers to play at MSG or the Devils to play at Prudential. What's your feeling on this? Because this is a chaotic situation, which I don't think the NHL is really going to like.
Right. I mean, the general impression I got is the group that owns the Coliseum right now kind of knows their building is a white elephant. They spent $180 million to renovate it, and I think they're kind of looking for someone to say, hey, you take some of this and we'll let you develop the land rights. Because one of the valuable pieces about the Coliseum is not the building itself, but the location. It's actually one of the more valuable pieces of property on Long Island. And I think the long-term solution for the Coliseum is eventually you knock it down, you put something else there. So I think what's happening is they realize their leverage of owning the Coliseum and renovating the Coliseum is, well, we've only got probably 2 or 3 more years of actual any kind of life out of this building. Then we have to figure out what else we're going to do with it. I think, they kind of got the county to come in. The county executive basically said we're going to look into this, and I have a feeling it's basically we're trying to buy our way out of owning this building that will become a white elephant once Belmont opens. And so I think it's a little bit of a shell game right now, but I think that's what's going on. I mean, I do think if worse comes to worse, I think the Islanders are going to have to end up playing at Barclays. Of course, it depends on how many fans are in the building anyway, because if they're only letting 25%, if they're letting anybody at all, because New York will probably want to be the last states to have fans, they could play in a much smaller venue. But my guess is they'll still play the Coliseum, considering the NHL season probably will be quite a ways after the playoffs.
Who's going to foot the bill for that? The $140 million?
Well, they're trying to find a developer to kind of come in and basically pay. It's basically you pay their bill and you get this land to develop.
Right.
Charles Long. It's going to be Charles.
You know how Long Island works.
I don't think they're going to get anybody in time.
It's going to be, I think in the worst case, I would think the county kind of takes on some of the money, of course, and then tries to flip it. Yeah, it's basically like we kind of knew, anyone who's been following the story knew this was kind of coming, because at some point, the two, Belmont and the Coliseum, are only about 10 miles apart. At some point, the Coliseum was going to be a massive white elephant. Yeah. Already, it only had, before the Islanders, it had G League basketball, it had indoor lacrosse, and they were anticipating all these events coming to the Coliseum. They were barely, they're getting a lot of B level events, and even before the Islanders arrived, you kind of said, well, once the Islanders leave, they're going to be in trouble. Well, about a year, they're going to be in trouble.
I just can't see Nassau County footing it when they're already working on the Belmont-Elmont thing. I don't think you're going to find a developer either. Like, I don't think that land is going to be developed quickly enough, because you have to go through all the red tape like Charles Wong did just to get a plan going. Yeah,
we found an investor. His name is Boots Del Biagio.
The irony is you could build the lighthouse now.
Right.
All right, just to cover all the bases in the New York area, Ted. Last week, Lindy Ruff was announced as the head coach of the New Jersey Devils. Took us a little bit by surprise. Tom Fitzgerald was made permanent as the general manager. That wasn't as big of a surprise. I know people who know Lindy. He's a good guy, but I was a little surprised it didn't go to somebody like Peter Laviolette or Gerard Gallant. It almost seemed like this was a more inexpensive option, and that was. But what did you think of the hire?
I thought it was a very kind of a safe pick. I think they're hoping that Lindy does what he did in Buffalo, kind of doing a lot with a little. Obviously they have some talent there, but they're still relatively thin in a tough division. And I think it's kind of like a coach you say when it has trainer wheels on, because you're kind of hoping he gets the team up to speed. Yeah. Eventually, he might be able to take him to the next level. If he can't, you hire someone else who does, who maybe is a Laviolette or something like that. But yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought they could have done a better job at filling the vacancy, but I see it as a kind of a safe pick. It's not a great, sexy pick, but it is what it is.
All right, let's talk about this. The report came out at the end of the show yesterday, and I think it's extremely positive that of 800 players and more than 2,600 tests, only 2 positives were reported. I think that's a great trend going into the bubble at the end of this week. Now, I just saw something from Ryan Rashog, who tweeted out that NHL players have to test negative 3 times within 48 hours in the 7 days before going to the bubble or going to the hub cities to be able to get into Canada. And then if anybody has positive tests, they're going to have to be held back. So there's one more, hurdle that these players have to cross before they are able to get into that bubble. And I mean, like I said, I would rather have a situation where they had 2 positives rather than, I think, the week before they had 35 or something of that nature. So, Ted, starting with you and then everybody else, I'm encouraged. I mean, for the skeptics out there who thought that this was going to be a tough task or a bridge too far, right now, I think hockey seems to, and I'm crossing my fingers when I say this, seems to have things in order.
I mean, yeah, you definitely look at the different plans by the different leagues, and I think the NHL is one of the better ones. NBA is probably the best one. The problem is they're in the middle of Florida, which obviously carries a lot more risk. I think the NHL did a very prudent decision moving both their hubs to Canada, just because the numbers there right now are so low, and even if they start to spike, then the teams will be dwindling to the point where hopefully it won't, nothing will happen with it. But I think it's going to be something. Obviously, they've done a very thorough job, which compared to Major League Baseball, which seems to be like we don't even know where the Blue Jays are playing next week. So throw up our hands and see what happens.
We thought it was going to be in Buffalo, but they're saying the lights aren't good. Come on, Salem Field was good enough for the major leagues back in 1988 when they built it. Come on.
I know, and it's there's nobody there anyway except for cutouts. So come on. But I definitely think. I mean, they have a decent. I thought going into this month, I thought the NHL probably had the best chance to pull this off just because of the location, and I think the players are more likely to buy into kind of we have to protect the bubble, whereas I'd be a little bit more worried about the NBA and maybe the NFL. But I think the NHL is a good shot to pull it off. Obviously, it wouldn't take much to pull it down, but I think they made a wise move going to Canada at this point.
I think the one positive thing I could say, besides everything Ted said, because I agree, is with the testing, at least it's coming from commercial sources, because I saw that MLS was not pulling from commercial sources, and they're getting turnaround time much quicker than the average person. The LA Times did a story on that, and that's exactly what you don't want if you're a pro sport. You should not be pulling away from testing from the general public, because that is a bad move. That is something where, that's not good, because people out there, they're regular citizens now. They're waiting like 20 days, where MLS guys are getting like 4-day turnaround, 2-day, 3-day turnaround.
Anthony, any thought on that?
Sorry, guys, I was in the midst of getting updates on Carter Hart. Apologies. We'll get to him in a sec. We'll get to that in a second. I'll tell you guys in a second.
But regarding the hubs and the positive.
Anthony, I'll take it while you catch up. So my view on this is, look, we thought overall that the NHL had a really good shot at getting this correct, and also mentality-wise, unlike the NBA, who have been complaining about the food and everything else, the NHL as a whole is not one in terms of their players to act that way. So kind of figured that they had a good shot at success in terms of just in general. Right. And then, in terms of locations, there was a lot of rumors in terms of locations. Toronto, as we saw, is not allowing the Blue Jays because you don't want people traveling in and out. But once you're sequestered there, what's going to happen is when a team gets eliminated, they're all going to leave, which means you're not going to have a worry of cross-contamination anyway, and you'll be able to maintain the bubble, hopefully, to a certain extent. So, we all thought that they had a really good shot, and so far what we've seen in terms of positive cases. Now, again, This is the 12th through the 17th. There's been a couple of people who've been missing practice that we don't know about that'll probably be filtered into the next round of tests in terms of it. And as Russ said, optically, you don't want to be taking tests away, even if the public wants sports. Taking it away just has a bad optic to it. So as long as you're segregated and segmented, you don't necessarily get the bad publicity that you might get otherwise.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse with the NFL testing every day, supposedly. Which I don't get, because I don't know if they're going to be able to get results.
Well, they have no protocol, so this is the easy way to just flush money, is to waste tests like that, because they have no protocols. They don't know what they're doing.
I mean, the NFL also is in a financial situation where they can pretty much, for lack of a better word, throw money at and say, hey, we're doing this, even if we don't have a plan. We have so much money that we can do this. And again, there's certain limitations to that once we actually get into active games and things of that sort, in terms of where they're going to start doing their hits.
We're going to open up our own lab. That's what they're going to do. All right. Breaking news here. Jan posted in the chat here the 3 nominees for the Hart. We'll talk about Carter Hart in a second. But the 3 nominees for the Hart, no, not surprisingly, Leon Draisaitl is one nominee. Nathan McKinnon. Now, I'm a little surprised that they didn't double up on the Oilers and go with McDavid. But Panarin, who we talked about when we were discussing who should be the nominee, one of the nominees for the Hart, Panarin did get nominated. I think it's justified. I don't think he's going to win it, but I think it was justified based on the year that he had. Ted, you first. What do you think of the 3 nominees?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think with Draisaitl, I think he has a strong shot. I think Panarin. It's interesting because had this been a normal year and the Rangers had missed the playoffs, he would probably not have been a nominee. He probably would not have made the cut. But I think it's probably going to be Draisaitl's. Probably McKinnon coming in second. But obviously Panarin carried that team and made it a lot more offensive than it was in the previous year. And I think he had a huge impact on the Rangers. And obviously the Rangers going to need him in the playoffs to do some damage. But it's pretty much where I was going to make it, and I think Draisaitl has the edge. I mean, I don't think he was – not like he's a clear runaway winner, but I think he's probably the best of the 3.
Ross?
Well, I mean, again, I think I said on the show, if I didn't, I voted for Pasternak, and I could easily replace McKinnon or Panarin for Pasternak. He had the most goals, the most power play goals, the most game-winning goals.
Yeah.
He had more points than McKinnon, same amount of points as Panarin. I mean, why should he get penalized for being on the Bruins? Goal scoring is goal scoring. It's not necessarily because you're on a better team. And that is the thing where this is, again, going with reputation over a young superstar, because this young superstar resides on a good team.
Well, Anthony, I almost get the feeling that Pasternak is punished because he's on such a good line, that he's with Marchand and Bergeron, so a little credit gets taken off. And if you notice, the 3 nominees for the Hart, none of them are the top 3 goal scorers. I
mean, he had 48 goals in 70 games. We're not talking 82 games.
Not Pasternak, not Ovechkin.
He might have had 60 goals this year.
Yeah, I would say in this circumstance normally, and as you just stated, as Ted stated, I think Panarin probably doesn't get on this list if they're not a playoff team, the Rangers. And I've said this before, I've been on the Nathan McKinnon train for a long time here, but again, it's tough for me to parse. Like Panarin's sort of, and as good a player as he's been in, the jump that he's given the Rangers offensively, him and Zibanejad are superstar, are borderline superstar players now. Panarin is a superstar player. McKinnon, I look at his overall game and how much he affects, I think, the Avs and where they would be. Would they be this high up the ladder right now in the Western Conference with his level of play? But again, you could say the same thing about Draisaitl, and some might say, well, Draisaitl's playing with, McKinnon's got to shoulder the load a little bit more, whereas, you've got McDavid there as well in Edmonton. But he's had such an exemplary year, Draisaitl, that it's tough for me to parse between the two of them. So at the moment, I have to really think about those between those two. Probably Draisaitl gets it, but if it was me doing it, I'd be still doing the votes. I would have to really think long and hard, and really parse between the two of them before I would be giving out my number 1 for the Hart.
Jan, I almost think that if McDavid was on this list, he would take away from Draisaitl. It would almost not negate him, because I think Draisaitl is the favorite, but it would take votes away from Draisaitl that might make a McKinnon or a Panarin a potential winner. What do you think?
So I mean, just like you said, like an against it, right? So you can almost take a crack at each one of them, right? So Draisaitl's case is hurt because he's got McDavid there, and that takes away from him, right? Maybe he's not, again, if you go by the way it's worded, it's the most valuable player to his team. Two superstars on one team, right? Then you go to, as Russ said, you talk about Pasternak, right? Well, he's hurt to a certain extent because you do have Bergeron there, and you do have Marchand on his line, and that takes away to a certain extent from him. Panarin, it's ironically enough, the halt in action may have helped him more than even just the fact that the Rangers weren't in the playoffs. Because if you look at what Zibanejad was doing down the stretch, if he had continued this for the next 3 weeks, that probably would have hurt Panarin's case, especially if they did make the playoffs, because then you can look in terms of just how good he was, and maybe he wasn't the most valuable to his team. I mean, to me, look, I'm biased because I'm a Ranger fan, but McKinnon was monster this year. We talked about it when the Ted Lindsay came out. If you look how much he carried that team with Rantanen out, with Makar out, with all the other injuries that they had, it's very easy to make a case for being most valuable, because they would in no way be in the position they're in without McKinnon potentially carrying that team. So you can make a case for all four of them. I do think the vote's going to be insanely close, as good as Draisaitl's year was, because I do think voters are going to take into account of just how good McDavid is, and he's going to draw some of the votes away from him.
All right, a couple notes, and we'll get to the Capitals here. The broadcasting assignments. Now, they didn't say specifically which series these teams were going to be covering, but it's for both the hubs in Edmonton and Toronto. It's going to be a world feed, like sort of similar to the Olympics. So I believe that NBC crews predominantly. I know that there was some update that some Canadian camera people would be used in Toronto after they were going to basically be shut out. But so it's a combo, but mostly NBC in Toronto and mostly Rogers employees in Edmonton. The broadcast crew for Canada will be Hewson and Simpson in Toronto, and Chris Cuthbert and Louis DeBrusque in Edmonton. For the U.S., I am assuming, I have not heard about, but I'm assuming Emmerich, John Forsland, Kenny Albert, and I think Gord Miller, who does work for TSN, will be handling the NBC broadcast. The interesting thing is 5-second delay, Ted, which, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but a 5-second delay, just because they don't want people if Brad Marchand drops an F-bomb, they want a little protection from that. And God knows he will be one of many players that will probably drop one every once in a while on the ice.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the different thing is, the players are used to playing with no one around. So, basically you'll be able to hear everything they say. And, and if you've seen the production of like an NBC game anyway, they build in a delay for the most part. Obviously it's a world feed, so the world has to do it as well. But, if you're watching a game that's on a national feed, it's usually about 15 seconds behind actual gameplay, because between the time they have the delay and then the uplink time. So, obviously it's going to be there'll be some people angry at tweeters in the building who are letting them know who scored, 10 seconds before they actually score.
Yeah, unless you're watching it on Game Center Live, then if you're at the game, by the time you get home, you're seeing the game-winning goal.
I do have to wonder, though, whether or not the league is going – if one of the rules comes into play in terms of the if you are a live reporter, how many people, number one, are in the building in terms of most of the live reporters, and whether or not there's going to be sort of I don't want to say a draconian rule of not tweeting, or
they may do that.
We'll just put a 20-second delay on all tweets going out, so that way you're caught up.
Exactly. No. Exactly. The press box Wi-Fi is going to be crap.
I was going to say
it'll be a 10 to 15 second delay.
Based on the quality of the Wi-Fi in some of the arenas, it's almost like a 20-second delay.
Well, the weird thing, a lot of people will be calling it off the TV broadcast, because all the regional networks are doing it in studio. So they'll be seeing exactly what the viewers see. Does that mean there's an extra delay because you're seeing off the feed, or what are they going to do? I mean, it's going to be very strange to see, the production of all this. There'll be some broadcasters in-house, but a lot of the local broadcasts will be, done in the studio.
I could see no live game tweeting. I could, because again, they did that before when they were afraid of Twitter, like 10 years ago. There was, especially during the Stanley Cup, they give you even a sheet that says what you could tweet and what you can't, where you can go, where you can't. I think it's going to be just as strict for this.
And how many, like in terms of how many writers are traveling? I mean, we do have a few. We know Sarah McClellan, for example, from Minnesota is there.
I think
how many reporters are, what the number is?
There could be 10 or 15.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of non-Canadian media, I know that John Warrow from AP is up there. I think because he's been tweeting from his hotel room in Toronto because he's got to do the 14-day quarantine. But I don't know how many American reporters are there. I know a lot of Canadian reporters got their credentials, and they're probably going to be the conduit for the information in those markets.
I mean, you think about a newspaper. If you're going to send someone over, you basically have to pay for 2 weeks of quarantine, missing time here, and then let's say if you're the Islanders, if you're out in 3, you basically did that for 4 days. So I haven't seen a lot of reporters. I mean, I know I looked into it just to see what the restrictions would be, and obviously it wasn't worth it to spend all that money for who knows how long the team would stay in there.
And what do you really get for it, Ted? Because we're getting access to the Zoom calls just like everybody else, and even the people there, that's all the access they're going to get. So you're going to pay for 2 weeks of quarantine so you can watch from the press box?
Right, exactly. I mean, maybe you're getting an edge on tweets by 5 seconds. You're going to pay a couple grand for that. I mean, I know a lot of newspapers. Like you were saying, I haven't seen many people from U.S. papers going over.
I don't think there's anybody I know from Philadelphia. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think there's anybody.
I don't think anybody on the Philadelphia press corps that's currently down that is going. I don't know for a fact, but I haven't heard anything along those lines. If anybody's going, it's going to be. I mean, it's very limited in terms of because you're just looking at it from a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
I mean,
by the time they have the conference finals and Stanley Cup, if the border starts opening up, then you might find more people in there because then there won't be a quarantine period.
I was going to say that's going to be an interesting. Let's say your team goes on a run to the conference final.
Right.
If there's still a quarantine, you probably have to find a freelancer because you can't send anyone up.
Right.
Because if you send someone up, team could be eliminated in the conference finals.
Right.
For nothing.
Well, I'll start swimming over the Niagara River to sneak into Canada so I can be one of those freelancers, Ted.
It may take you 2 weeks to get there, Mike.
Yeah, I'll end up over the falls, Jan. All right, Anthony, give us an update on the Carter Hart thing. I saw something from Sam.
So at the moment, there really will not be much of an update with regards to it because, again, per the league rules right now, they can only acknowledge the fact that he came off the ice after the first period of today's scrimmage. There was a few tweets here and there from some of the I know from the report here that came, from the Zoom press conferences. I know Kevin Hayes had said it wasn't sort of an indication of an injury or anything like that. It's if it is, it's going to be relatively. It sounds to me like it's going to be something that's relatively minor. But again, there's no sort of we just don't know for sure at the moment. The degree of the injury, and you're not going to hear necessarily anything. Officially, I'm just scrolling back a little bit here from there was
confusion, like when they were looking at him.
Which in many ways we're expecting that this is going to be.
Although Pete DeBoer, he didn't care. He gave up.
It depends. It
so
depends
the team wanted to. Clearly, he doesn't have COVID. So if the team wants to, they could say what's wrong with Carter Hart. They really could because this isn't like a COVID situation. So
Kevin Hayes does not know what happened. Kevin Hayes says he doesn't know what happened. This is from the hopes it's nothing too serious. Added, it's not the end of the world if someone misses a little time in camp.
The NHL injury update is getting their cues from Frank Drebin of Police Squad. Nothing to see here. That's basically what it is, and that's sad. But that's the new reality. All right, let's talk about the Capitals here. We got about 10, 15 minutes to go here. Ted, I look at the Cap now. Obviously, they're in the round robin. They're a team that loaded up at the deadline. They got Brendan Dillon, who I think was one of the more sought after and probably the most popular of the deadline defensive rentals. They also brought in Ilya Kovalchuk, which I know that Russ was a critic of because, he's not going to play the top 6 role that he played in Montreal. He's going to be sort of a complementary piece. But I look at this team and I look, they won a couple years ago. They still have guys in their prime who are great. They have a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman in Carlson. This is a team that's, I think, among the favorites in the East, no doubt.
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, they obviously have some of the biggest talent in the East right now. My biggest concern for them would be in the first round. I think they could be vulnerable just because I know we've talked about it in the past of sometimes they don't necessarily ramp into gear when they need to. And I think the danger for a lot of these top seeds is they're going to find these teams that win the best of 5 are be coming into the series with a lot more energy than a team that's got through the round robin. Even if you go 3-0 in the round robin, it's not the same as winning a best of 5 series. I was going to say too, the other concern might be Ilya Samsonov, who hasn't practiced yet. Obviously, Braden Holtby is going to be a free agent. I think the thinking was he probably would resign before all this happened. Now with the cap being stuck, are the Caps going to sacrifice some talent next year, or is this a swan song? So it'll be interesting to watch and see how they do.
Yeah, Ted and I watched a lot of Flyers Caps this year, and Ted pointed out before they started how they've had a lot of laziness, just complacency, even with all the talent. And they clearly did that night against Philly. Philly just was taking them apart at times. And I still think the Caps can come out of the East, but with all this talent, the bigger question is, does Todd Reirden really have their ear? I'm not sure. I haven't really seen that yet. And I think this is the big test for Todd Reirden here because he does have all the talent in the world. There's no reason this team shouldn't move at least a couple rounds. If you get upset, you get upset. It can happen to anybody. But if they get knocked out in the first round, I think Todd Reirden, not that he's going to be in trouble, but I do think they're going to start looking at him like, he's having trouble motivating these guys.
But they were not very good coming out of coming down the stretch. They basically, they played poorly. They won one game against Pittsburgh to probably save Reirden's job at the time. They looked like they were very close to firing him just because they were so lethargic and so checked out at times, to be honest. So I'm curious, like Russ, are they going to come back and say, well, this is a short time. We don't have to deal with a lot of the things we didn't like Reirden about, or is it going to be the same old, we can win because we have talent, which won't get you anywhere.
Jan?
Well, I mean, the thing also, though, is remember, with the Caps, until they made that run, right, there was enough questions about Trotz as to whether or not Trotz was the right guy because they kept failing early on in the playoffs. And that final run when he ended up winning the Cup and then stepping away kind of cemented his legacy. But for years, they were viewed as a disappointment and underachiever. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily putting it on Reirden or necessarily just for the Capitals in general. But, yeah, talent-wise, you look at that team, especially if Holtby can get on the run like he did a couple of years ago or play as solidly as he did, that's a team that you would think should go very far, at a minimum, making it to the semis, if not necessarily the conference finals.
My biggest concern with the Capitals, again, comes back to their blue line. I think after their top 3, I have my concerns about their depth. We see, I think, a team that can roll deep in terms of 4 lines, 3 deep pairs. I have my concerns that the Caps can get worn down in a series, and they've had some, again, long runs in the playoffs here, and and I do have saw enough of it. Obviously, when Philadelphia went to Washington and just basically turned play around and folded the ice in half in terms of getting turnovers against them, and that's the big concern I have for the Caps. They can come out of the East. They do have firepower. I just have my concerns that whether or not their defense, if you're shouldering a big load on Carlson, Orlov, and others up front or on defense. Dylan, who's just kind of coming into the mix here. Obviously, he's been with them for a bit, obviously, since the trade. But I have my concerns about them after that on their blue line.
Yeah, Ted,
hang on. I do want to break in just for 1 sec because I know I'm going to leave in 5 minutes. So, Ant, I do find it interesting. Like, the Flyers won't even let Carter Hart talk to the media. Like, that is not a surprise. Again, the minute he went off the ice, I said, even though he was supposed to be available for Zoom, that wasn't a surprise. But again, that's part of for how the NHL's handling this whole thing, whether it's injuries or COVID in either circumstance.
it's their ability to go omerta on everything.
And Russ, if they do present him to the media, he's going to have the Hannibal Lecter mask on his mouth, so they prevent him from. Anyway, Ted, I'll echo what Anthony said in terms of their defense. In terms of looking at after the season, we don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs, but. We had heard during the year the Nick Jensen signing, they signed him to a 4-year extension. That has not panned out. He has not lived up to expectations. Gudis is a free agent. Dillon is a free agent. They've got young guys like Lucas Johansson coming up. I don't know what the pipeline, what is in the pipeline. Maybe they go to Europe to sign a defenseman. But right now I look at their salary structure, and they're so top heavy at forward, that I would think that either an expansion the following year or maybe by trade, they're going to have to move out an Eller or somebody like that to clear space.
Well, that's a curious thing with Holtby, because I think the general thinking is perhaps that Jensen would go, dump him off to somebody else and try to fit in Holtby. And, now we don't know what McClellan's plan is. Maybe he's trying to keep Holtby and maybe try to offer him up to Seattle if he doesn't perform to expectations after next season. But it's interesting because obviously Samsonov is a good young prospect, but I'm not sure he's going to be a number one goaltender yet. And I don't think he'll see a lot of action in the playoffs, even when he comes back. But, obviously Holtby's been a lot for them. He's been dating back to 2012. He's performed very well in some runs. He kind of makes up for a little bit of that lackluster defense because he'll make those saves that you need at times. That's what he did 2 years ago, and he really can do that. And the big question for him is, A, how is he going to perform? Obviously he's had a massive layoff, and 2, will the contract be on his mind? I don't think it will be, but you never know.
Well, the question I have, and everybody can answer this, is, Holtby's 30 years old. This is probably his last chance to get the big deal, the big long-term deal. This is probably the worst year to be looking for that, but if he gets an offer for, say 3, 4, 5 years, he's probably going to take it. Would he take a 1-year deal to come back to the? I don't think he'd take Anthony. I don't think he'd take a 1-year deal to take another swing at a cup with the Capitals if he gets offered 3 or 4 years someplace else.
He's going to try to. I would think Holtby's going to look to strike now for a longer term contract. I don't see because then it's a year later. Then they can use again. He's 31 now, so in terms of extending his contract at that point, no. Holtby's going to be like, I have the resume. What I'm capable of. Right. This is the term that I am going to be that I will accept.
But Jan, and this is unlike the Rangers situation where Lundqvist, as great as he is, he's coming to the end of it. Holtby's not coming to the end of it. He's still in his prime. Now he's had some ups and downs lately. But with the Rangers, you know that Shesterkin or Georgiev is capable of taking over the number one job. At least everybody thinks they are. As Ted said, Samsonov, he's got 20, 25 games of NHL experience. Putting him into the number one spot is going to be very risky. And even if they let Holtby go, they're probably going to have to find themselves a 1B goaltender to play 30 or 40 games to take the heat off of them. So they're in a weird situation.
Absolutely. And the question becomes is how many teams want goalies, first of all. B, how many are willing to go 3, 4, 5 years on a guy who's going to want maybe $4 to $6 million in a flat cap. And then we also talked about in the past, right? Robin Lehner's going to be out there. Corey Crawford, depending on health, may be out there. So it's not as if that Holtby's going to be the only option available. So Washington could be an option depending on how much the pull of remaining with them is for Holtby, and B, it may be determined as to what kind of a run they go on here and whether or not he wants to stay around to try to take another crack at winning a cup. Because you can make arguments there are teams that are towards the bottom of the league that might need goalies, but is Holtby going to just pursue the money and the years, or does he want to be in a situation where he has another realistic shot at winning a cup?
And complicating that even further, Ted, is the fact that there are going to be a number of teams out there that have 2 goaltenders, like, for example, Pittsburgh with Jari and Murray. With the specter of the expansion draft, they can only protect one of them. So they're probably going to be proactive and try to move one of those goalies before the expansion draft. So that floods the market even more. So, maybe Holtby waits, if he gets paid the same amount of money, maybe he waits a year and tries to go free agent the following year. But that's a risky proposition because you can get hurt.
And McClellan's always believed in the philosophy of we want to keep our core together. obviously we wanted to make sure that when Carlson was up, he stayed, and obviously Backstrom signed over the regular season. So I think I wasn't one in the camp, but a lot of people presume that Holtby was going to leave. I'm not one of the camp. I think they will, if they want to keep him, they're going to have to basically cut out some other parts. Like Jensen's contract, certainly one.
Richard Panik.
Yes, exactly. Those guys you can move, and I could see McClellan doing that and say, well, we'll fill in the fourth line and the third D pair somewhere else. I'd rather do that than lose my goaltender.
Now, the one, and they don't have to worry about this for at least another year, but you look at Cap Friendly and you look at the Capitals list, and at the top here, making $9.5 million next year is Alex Ovechkin, and then you see UFA. And we've heard the talk about him going to Russia, but I cannot see him with possibly a legitimate chance of catching Gretzky's goal scoring record, him going to the KHL. But how much is it going to cost them to sign him to an extent? He's going to be a $10, $11 million player.
You wonder if he's going to go on some short-term, because I don't think he wants to play elsewhere in the league.
Right.
He might be more willing to go on a short-term deal. As long as the Capitals are competitive, he's willing to stay, and as long as he has a realistic shot. Obviously, he hasn't gotten injured for a long period in his career. If the window kind of closes, he may consider going back to Russia. But I always thought that the KHL was going to be kind of the closing chapter. He'll play his last season or two in the KHL, and he'll stay as long with the Capitals as long as they're competitive, and I think he'll find a way to stay with the Capitals as long as they're competitive.
Like Datsuk did, yeah. All right, just to finish off the show, Ted, because we don't have you on all the time. What series or what potential matchup excites you the most in the play-in round, or at the next round if a team wins?
Well, I'm fascinated to see how a team like Toronto does, because obviously, they're kind of like a Capitals in terms of having loads of talent, but they're getting to play at home. How are they going to do? The Rangers series is also very interesting to me, because I think the Rangers are one of those qualifier teams. I think they can make a run. It's just fascinating because you look at this whole setup, the whole gap in between is longer than a Stanley Cup champion normally has in the summer. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be kind of just, with the best of fives are already unpredictable. You added a 4-month layoff, and you really don't know what you're going to get. I mean, the last year the NHL did best of fives. The top seeds were 4-4. So, you could have a lot of upsets in that first round. You could have a lot of upsets in that, the first round of the regular playoffs. So I think it's going to be probably one of those years you just have a weird Final Four and a weird Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I drew the ire, Anthony, of Leaf fans by picking the Blue Jackets in 5, and it was I didn't do it with any particular glee. I just look at the type of team that the Blue Jackets are, who is coaching them, and how that matches up with the Leafs. The Leafs being a more wide open offensive team that has trouble keeping the puck out of their own net, and looking at Columbus playing, the Tortorella close to the vest type style, and that is not a good matchup for them.
It's not, but as I had a discussion on another podcast yesterday, and it depends also on how the games are going to be called.
Yes,
by the refs. Are we going to see referees calling this almost like early season, where everything gets called because they know the microscope is on them? And that gives the Leafs the power. It gives them in a short series power play and special teams opportunities that might give them the edge over a team like Columbus. I think that is a possibility there to consider. Now, if it's your classic playoff call where they're not going to be a lot of, and it's going to be much more 5-on-5 play,
right?
That I think becomes a real tough order for a team like the Maple Leafs.
Jan,
I was going to say, I think too, it's going to be interesting. A lot of the system teams, I think, might have a little trouble starting out of the gate. I think early on in the tournament, the teams with talent are going to have a bit of an advantage, because it usually takes a while for a team, like say the Islanders, to kind of get back in their mode. And they're not necessarily more talented than their opponent, but they kind of work up the building in the system. They've been off for 4 months, and they're going to have one meaningless game in between. How is a team loaded with talent going to do against a team that's used to kind of outworking the other team in a trap whenever they have all been idle for 4 months? That's what I'm really interested to see.
Jan, other than Leafs Columbus, which I'm going to be focusing on, obviously, The series that intrigues me the most is Rangers Carolina, and I know that you wrote about it yesterday, and you got some flack from somebody who was leaving comments in the blog. But it's like I look at the Rangers and I look how they match up against Carolina. I look at the concerns that, with Carolina about their goaltending, which I've never been a fan of. They've got defensemen like Vatanen and coming back from an injury, and Hamilton coming back from an injury. There's a lot of question marks with the Canes, and the fact that the Rangers beat them 4 straight in the regular season has to be factored in.
Yeah, I mean, no question. But to me, as I've talked about a couple of times, right, you kind of have to throw a lot of those matchups out the window right now. Similarly, anything that happened, because last games in general were 4 months ago. The last time those two teams met were 5 months ago. Carolina is now reintroducing Hamilton into their lineup, reintroducing Vatanen into their lineup. And I haven't written my previews yet, but as you talked about, the big differentials is probably goaltending for the Rangers, regardless of who's between the pipes. Lundqvist, because of his historical record against Carolina, and Shesterkin just based on talent compared to Reimer or Mrazek. Mm-hmm. Forwards is probably pretty easy, though Carolina is pretty even, though Carolina is much more top-heavy than the Rangers. Their top line is probably going to be their main producer by far, with Aho, Teravainen, and Svechnikov. And then Carolina has the edge defensively, right? So it's an intriguing series just because, A, of the historical perspective between the teams and the record that Lundqvist has. B, the Rangers have become, for lack of a better term, in some people's eyes, almost like the darling dark horse, where they think that goaltending can take them on a long run, which I'm sure gives a little chip on the shoulder to Carolina, which also has it from Brady Shea, who's looking to get back at his former team. So you have a lot of interesting subplots that go on. But one of the other matchups we've talked about, is one Edmonton-Chicago. If Crawford's healthy, they have a puncher's chance because of the history that Kane and Taves have in the playoffs. And then we talked about Pittsburgh-Montreal. On paper, it's a whitewash for Pittsburgh, but there is a little nagging factor behind that's called Carey Price that everybody was afraid to play, which gives them also a little bit of a chance come playoff time. Though we don't think it's going to happen, we have most certainly seen stranger things when playoffs start.
And Crosby's not practiced the last couple of days, so if he's out, then that evens the score a little bit.
For me, the playoff series that I'm actually utterly fascinated with is going to be Nashville, Arizona. I really going back to Ted's discussion of talent of team that's operating on talent as Nashville has substantially up front versus a team that has maybe a bit more of a systems team here in the Arizona Coyotes. But the Coyotes do have some offensive firepower. This is a big moment here for Taylor Hall. Going into his contract here. We already heard about how the reporters that Xavier Gutierrez met with him with regards to having dinner and everything. So that's the beginning of trying to get Hall on board. I like the Coyotes and how they're in many ways and how they're structured. I think their defense is really good. Kemper, if he's healthy, can really. I think that Arizona to me is almost kind of a dark horse, not only to take a round, but if they really get it going, they could be one of those weird teams that Ted discussed in terms of maybe surprising and getting all the way to a conference final, possibly.
Yeah, I think Kemper's the key.
Kemper's critical to me, but I love their blue. Again, I think their defense is good, and I think they play within themselves. And I have my doubts about Nashville in terms of they're to me they've played less than the sum of their parts, and I don't want to say I'm not a believer in John Hines, but I'm not sure. To me, the coaching matchup there is going to be really fascinating to watch as well.
Yeah, get used to seeing Roman Josi playing 35 minutes a night. Ted, thank you very much for joining us on short notice. We'll definitely have you on again during the playoffs. Whether Washington loses in the first round or not. But thank you very much for joining.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Okay, for the departed Russ Cohen, for Jan Levine, for Anthony Mangione, and for Ted Starkey, I'm